Now let's bring in our guests in Tel Aviv. We have Gideon Levy, a columnist at Haaretz newspaper. Also in West Jerusalem, Mitchell Barak, founder of Kivon Research, Strategy and Communications, and a former aide to Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. And also in Tel Aviv, we're joined by Meirav Sunshine, a senior Israel analyst at the International Crisis Group. Thank you to all three for joining us here on Inside Story. Mitchell, Israel was of course not a part of these negotiations. It hasn't signed the paper either, but it certainly affects Israel on many fronts. You've personally worked closely with Benjamin Netanyahu. How do you think he reacted when he saw the full text of that memorandum of understanding between the U.S. and Iran?
Well, I haven't worked for him in 30 years, and I worked for him when he was a deputy prime minister, but I probably imagine he slammed his fist on the table when he saw it or when he heard about it. I mean, the problem is that, he thought he was going in this war with a very strong ally together with clear goals. And it very much looks like we're signatories to an agreement that the U.S. has made with the Islamic Republic with Iran without our consent. And it's a binding agreement which says what the allies of the United States in this war will do. And I think there's also a number of Gulf countries that were also kind of are being forced here, and their interests are not being taken into account, as well as the Lebanese people. So, I'm sure there's a tremendous amount of disappointment, but for Netanyahu, real concern with security, both with the capability of the Iranians still intact, their desire to achieve nuclear weapons, and the Hezbollah sitting right on our border. We have some real problems here.
If Netanyahu indeed did slam his fist on the table, you couldn't really tell from that press conference on Monday night. When he talked about this deal, he said that this war has actually prevented the annihilation of Israel and that Iran will never have a nuclear weapon as long as he is the prime minister. Meirav, do you think that this agreement accomplishes what Netanyahu actually set out to do with this war?
Well, of course not. This isn't really an agreement. This is more of a ceasefire extension and an opening of the Strait of Hormuz, which Trump realized is going to paralyze the global economy if he doesn't do something about it. I mean, I think what we have is a situation in which the U.S. thought that Israel could get a win in this war, similar to what happened in June 2025, when it was short and somewhat victorious, and now it's realized that it's lost the war. I mean, this deal, this MOU, this ceasefire, whatever it is, it reflects the fact that Israel hasn't reached its goals, that the use of military force, neither in Iran nor in Lebanon, has been able to achieve security for Israel, neither for the region. The Gulf states are certainly not happy with what has happened in the war. So this is basically just a reflection of the fact that Israel has gone too far, and Trump has gone too far, and he at least has realized that, whereas Netanyahu, I think, is still trying to see how he can maneuver.
Gideon, you hear these comments from your two panelists, the other two panelists here on the program. They're talking about how this deal does not actually do what Netanyahu wanted. Some analysts have described it as a catastrophic deal, some people in Israel. Is that what this is, a catastrophic deal, or does it provide some kind of deeper insight, a reality check for Netanyahu and his multi-front war?
It's catastrophic to those megalomaniac Israelis who believe that Israel can change regimes all over the world, that Israel can bomb everywhere at any time, that Israel has the right to violate the sovereignty of any country. For them, it is a catastrophe because they have to face reality all of a sudden. And I really think that this agreement can be also a great opportunity to reconnect with reality. I really hope that Israelis will once and for all draw the lesson, namely that with military force, as well equipped we are, as technologically developed we are, this is not the solution for any problem, for every problem. There are certain issues which cannot be addressed only by power, only by military force, only by bombardments. Unfortunately, in the recent years, Israel speaks only in this language and totally ignores any alternative. Maybe now, after this fiasco, and no doubt it is a fiasco, maybe this fiasco will turn into an opportunity in which Israel will look at the reality, realize that there are limits for using its military force. There are limits for its megalomaniac plans to change the whole Middle East and to change regimes like you change socks, and get back to the reality that we are quite a small country, totally depending on the United States like never before, and we should behave according to those conditions. And this might bring us to a new mindset.
Mitchell, do you agree with that reality check that you're hearing from Gideon?
Well, it's always good to get a reality check. I appreciate his optimism in such circumstances, and we've gotten a, sort of a rebuke or a lesson from the vice president. I think Israelis, have, to a certain extent, not realized that the U.S. is really, helping support Israel for many, many years. And, we owe a great deal of debt to the United States governments, all of them, and presidents, and the people of the United States. So I do think it could be an opportunity, especially now with the election coming up, that Israelis will recalibrate and think that, there should be a certain level of diplomacy that can do something. And it's not just military might, which was shown here to have its limitations, but we were all schooled in economic threats, where the Islamic Republic of Iran closed down the Straits of Hormuz and strangled the world and strangled oil prices and food, and food production and shipping everywhere. And they were able to economically, a country like that, threaten the world. And that has lessons and ramifications for many, many other countries, and the way we have to consider, all of our options going into battles in the future. So that is certainly relevant, and diplomacy and these kinds of things should be more on the table. I think one of the problems, though, is the agreement did put everything into the United Nations Security Council. That's not a place that we particularly care for and has been even fair to us over the years, meaning the eventual agreement, according to what it says, is going to, a UN Security Council resolution. That's really strange that President Trump, would kind of do that when he's been fighting the United Nations, since he's been in office. So we'll have to wait and see.
Merav, you said that Israel has gone too far and that Netanyahu has not actually achieved what he set out to do. But Donald Trump calls this deal a wall stopping Iran from actually getting a nuclear weapon. Do you disagree with that?
I mean, Trump says a lot of things, and I wouldn't take stock into most of what he says. I don't think that he's a coherent person necessarily. He can market something as a victory when it's a defeat, vice versa. He can, on the same day, undermine Netanyahu and his image, and at the same time give Netanyahu tons of weapons and power. So I wouldn't really put much stock into what Trump is saying. I think it's more important what he's doing, and he clearly realized that he made a mistake in joining Netanyahu or in leading this war with Netanyahu in this specific case. So that's really the reality here. I think the bigger question is, what is Netanyahu going to do about it? Because he put all of his eggs in the Trump basket, not just with Iran, but with his domestic political situation. I mean, he has marketed himself as Trump's best friend. And now the situation looks quite different. And the future of U.S.-Israel relations, I think, is also in question. I don't want to over-dramatize this, but other than U.S. public opinion shifting dramatically in the last couple of years, you have a U.S. administration that is the most pro-Israel you could ever imagine, and now looks very, very angry and resentful with Israel. The question is Trump going to put all of that leverage into what we are seeing now in Lebanon and put a real stop to what's happening there? And I also have to add that if Israel thinks that it's projecting power by remaining in Lebanon, and its defense minister just minutes ago saying again that soldiers will remain in southern Lebanon and this, what they call the security barrier, when those soldiers are sitting ducks for Hezbollah attacks, and then using those Hezbollah attacks to continue to attack further in Lebanon and undermine whatever Iran-US ceasefire they're trying to sustain, that's not a projection of power. That's a projection of weakness. You don't remain and endanger soldiers for absolutely no reason, as far as I can tell. So that, to me, is a real question for Netanyahu and a real dilemma.
Let's stick to this relationship between the U.S. and Israel for now. Gideon, how extraordinary is it that Israel was actually left out of these negotiations when, in fact, this is an agreement that highly affects what's going on in Israel in terms of Iran's proxies, for example?
It's very extraordinary. It's almost unprecedented. But in the same time, it shouldn't surprise anybody, because you have the feeling that the current administration, including Donald Trump, had it enough with Israel. They had enough with Israel, which gets all the support, all the supply, all the aid, and one time after the other is annoying, in an annoying way, reacting in a very, very negative way to all the American requests, condemnation, threats. Again and again, Israel thinks that it can go on with its own path while totally ignoring the American interest. So it was very clear that this moment will come in which one president or the other will ask himself the most obvious question: why do we do this? Why do we spend so much taxpayers' money on Israel when Israel doesn't even listen to our advices and doesn't even coordinate our interest with their interests? The United States calls for the two-state solution now for decades. The United States is against the settlement project for decades, and Israel just ignores it. So there is a moment in which one president, it was Donald Trump, unfortunately much too late, who says enough is enough.
Gideon, what do you mean by that? Enough is enough.
As I said, there are certain conditions for getting all this aid. There are certain behaviors which are unaccepted. You know, when the entire cabinet of Israel and all the aides and echoes of Netanyahu in the media are calling Witkoff and Kushner as Jew boys, and talking about the American president, which is the last friend of Israel in the United States, as in all kinds of adjectives, which really unheard of. What do you think, that the Americans will accept it? I was quite shocked for decades how former administrations accepted it, how the Barack Obama's administration, who really, his heart was in the right place, and he gave Israel more military aid than any other American president. Why so? Why in an unconditional way? And then Joe Biden, who went through all the humiliations by Netanyahu and still continued to support Israel. And for Donald Trump, enough is enough, which means we have to rethink about our relationship, because something is very sick in those relationships, and something is very unhealthy and calls for change. And I think the change will be seen very, very soon.
I'm sure all three of you heard the U.S. Vice President J.D. Vance speaking about the critics in Israel who were critical of this deal, where he basically voiced his dislike about that. Let's take a listen to what J.D. Vance had to say.
That over the last 3 months, 2/3 of the defensive weapons that have protected your homeland have been built by American hands and paid for by American tax dollars. The problem for Israel is not Donald J. Trump. And anybody in Israel who thinks their biggest problem is the President of the United States needs to wake up and smell the reality of the situation.
Merev, was it a mistake on behalf of Netanyahu to put so much personal prestige on this personal relationship with Donald Trump?
I mean, it seems that way, but we'll have to wait and see what actually takes place. I mean, we're seeing rhetoric coming out of the U.S. administration that we've never heard before. I mean, what J.D. Vance just said would be unheard of, and a Democratic president would never say such things publicly. So we're really kind of in uncharted territory. I think it is important, though, to keep in mind that while the U.S. has supported and provided immunity and impunity to Israel over decades, and Trump specifically recognized Israel's annexation of Jerusalem, of the Golan Heights. He turned settlements into a non-issue. I mean, formally, he did things that no other president would have ever done. But at the same time, the U.S. has interests in the region. It's not a peace-loving nation necessarily. It has interests that Israel has served for it. It has bases also in Israel. And Israel uses a lot of U.S. military aid to buy back weapons from the U.S. So it's not all just the U.S. giving charity to Israel. There are obviously still strategic interests that are shared here. But I think obviously in this current moment in time, those interests are in conflict. And Trump, unlike any other president, is willing to, for example, negotiate with Hamas, negotiate with the Islamic Republic. He's doing things that no other president has done. And he's also making Israel look a lot smaller than it feels. And so that is a reality check, as Gidon was talking about. And so we'll have to wait and see what actually happens on the ground. I mean, the U.S. just said that there's a ceasefire in Lebanon, and I still see that there's shooting happening between the sides. So, if the U.S. talks a big talk, it also needs to follow that up with real action that limits Israel's capabilities.
Mitchell, you know that Netanyahu has been talking so much about this threat from Iran throughout his career, the nuclear threat. And if we look at the details of this MOU, it now talks about how Iran is able to maintain the status quo of its nuclear program pending a final deal. Also in paragraph 8, it talks about how they're now going to discuss Iran's nuclear needs based on a satisfactory framework being agreed upon. It almost seems like this is allowing Iran to maintain its current program, and it also validates Iran's rights to have some kind of nuclear program going forward. Is this a shift, do you think, from the U.S. perspective in terms of what they are willing to agree on Iran's nuclear assets and capabilities?
Well, it definitely looks like a shift as to what President Trump was talking about a few weeks ago, a few months ago. It's an amazing shift, and it's a massive shift, and it's one that really is problematic for Israelis and many in the region. And many of our, Gulf neighbors have been under attack too. There's a real problem with this agreement. But for Netanyahu politically, meaning he has been working up to this moment his entire career, and he was getting over the debacle and the failure of the October 7th Simchat Torah massacre in 2023. And it was just about to, telling people he's remaking the Middle East. The Islamic resistance, Hamas, is finished. Hezbollah, the Party of God terror organization, is finished. And we're now going to destroy Iran. And there may even be regime change, but there'll be no nuclear weapons. Well, it's kind of slipped out of his hands now. And as he's facing the next election, he would have had the choice of possibly being reelected easily or even retiring on a high and saying, I've completed everything that I've done the last 3 decades. And now he's really at probably the lowest point politically, because he's even lost, the support of the president of the United States and that friendship that he's selling everyone. But I think part of the problem happened a while ago. We've let the President Trump talk about meddling in the Israeli justice system by mentioning again and again and again that the president of Israel, Herzog, should grant Netanyahu a pardon. And no one really in the Likud or on the right, or even the prime minister himself, says, hey, we are an independent country. Don't meddle in our affairs. And that was kind of like a forerunner of, if he thinks he can meddle in our internal judicial affairs and get people accused of crimes off because it serves the national interest, then there's no stopping him with anything else. And Gideon, we made that mistake.
At the time of the recording of this program, there has been a ceasefire just agreed between Israel and Hezbollah. And we also talked just now about how Iran appears to be having some sort of concession in this deal to possibly have a nuclear program going forward. Talk to me about Netanyahu's political considerations at this point. We're only a few months away now from this election. How is he going to ride out this storm?
Not sure he's capable. I mean, in the past, he proved that he is a magician when it comes to elections. But I think all his tricks will not work this time. And I'm quite confident that he will not be the next prime minister of Israel. Again, enough is enough in terms of he survived the 7th of October catastrophe, which no other statesman would have survived in any other country. He survived it, But now comes the second fiasco, and this was one fiasco too much. I don't see any way that he will be able to create the next government. And until now, there is not one serious poll which shows it in a different way. The only question is how big will the majority of the other camp, who will lead the other camp. But I'm quite confident that Netanyahu's way gets to its end, and it's about time to do so.
Meirav, Donald Trump has tried very hard to paint this as a win for the world, with oil prices going down, the stock market is up, oil flowing again, Iran promising not to buy or develop a nuclear weapon. Don't you think that this could also be seen as a win for the people of Israel?
I don't think that they see it that way. No, they've been in war now for almost 3 years. Obviously, Israel has done horrible things to its neighboring countries in Gaza. Israelis don't seem to care too much about that, but they feel that they are not anywhere closer to security than they were before October 7th. Obviously, they've degraded the capabilities of Hezbollah, of Hamas, and to an extent, Iran. But all of those fronts are open. And I think Gideon talks about Netanyahu probably not winning, but this goes much deeper than just Netanyahu. He obviously is a huge problem, and, countries should have other leaders. So he clearly, needs to make room for someone else. But this goes deeper to Israeli society, to the fact that people here have served in this army and done these things, and they have sat in shelters for 40 days at a time this time around. And what did they get out of it? They got the opening of the Strait of Hormuz. We have to wait and see what else happens. But for now, I think Israelis feel very, very a no personal sense of security. Certainly Palestinian citizens of Israel don't feel that. Certainly Palestinians in the occupied West Bank and Gaza are much worse off and under constant aggression. But in terms of the Jewish Israeli public, they may not like Netanyahu. They may be upset with him about other issues that have nothing to do with security, but they have not, I think, fully realized the limits of military force. And they need a vision, and they need a leader who can provide an alternative. And unfortunately, they still don't have that. So it's something that we'll have to wait and see. It goes much, much deeper than just Netanyahu.
I'd like to say thank you to all three of you for joining us on Inside Story today. Meirav Sunshine, a senior Israel analyst at the International Crisis Group. Also thank you to Gideon Levy, a columnist at Haaretz newspaper, and also Mitchell Barak, founder of Kivon Research, Strategy and Communications. Thank you to all three of you. And thank you too for watching. You can see the program again at any time by visiting our website, aljazeera.com. And for further discussion, you can go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can also join the conversation on X. Our handle is @AJ Inside Story. For now, that's it from me, Per Nyberg, and the whole team here in Doha. Al Jazeera's coverage continues in just a moment. Stay with us.